All right, so we'll be transitioning to question and answer session. We have both speakers available, so your question can be directed at one, the other, or both. Just let me know. And I'll walk around to you with the microphone if you have a question.
I have a microphone too.
All right, we have a question from Marty. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Marty Frometh. I am actually one of the protégés here with HillVets, and I'm a reservist in the Air Force, been in for 15 years, and I'm also an intelligence professional, so everything you all are speaking about with regards to clearances hits very, very close to home to me. I'm also very public about this. I struggle from anxiety, depression, have sought mental health, and also medication in support of these struggles in my life. One of the things, and Trish, you hit upon this, is cultural changes, particularly in the intelligence community, more specifically the military intelligence community, and changing the way we look at seeking for help. I know there's been back and forth on the SF-86 and changes in direction. Do you believe legislation is required to provide the overarching, definitive guidance as to whether or not mental health, more specifically seeking talk therapy, SSRIs, et cetera, is a disqualifier for a security clearance? And that's the end of my question.
I saw that there was it looks like a question was just asked, but I can tell you, Trish, I can't hear. Are you getting audio?
No, I'm not getting audio either.
I'm sorry, whoever was asking, it looked like a very long and thought out question.
It did, yeah.
But I think they're working through the audio issues, so I think it'll be just a second.
While they work through the audio issues, maybe, Ian, we can talk a little bit about some of the changes that have been made in the last 2 years regarding our security clearance updates. So in the past, do we have audio now?
We can hear you. Can you hear me? How about now? Can you hear?
Very little. The audio is pretty low. I think I can talk for Ian that this is, or speak with Ian's agreement, that this is the part where our heart just breaks if we're not there in person.
Can you hear the feed now?
I can hear something just very faintly in the background, so I'll do my best voice interceptor impersonation, and if you want to ask the question again, we'll give it a shot.
Okay, we're going to try this again, and I'll be much briefer. Can you guys hear us now? Yes. Okay. So I'll be far more brief. More specifically, I'm interested in whether or not you think legislation is needed at this point in order to convey and message the importance of seeking or changing the culture rather in seeking mental health support, whether that's in-person counseling or SSRIs, et cetera. Do you think we're at the point where legislation is needed for that messaging?
Trish, I'd love to jump on first if I can. So I think I can say specifically for the DoD, I think it will help in the sense that so much of what happens in the military is personality dependent. You know, the entire organizational culture of a command or a unit can change based on who the commander is and based on a few key personalities within that command, for better or worse. You can take a broken command and completely turn them around with the right leader at the helm. However, without actual structural changes to try to influence the culture that you're working towards, it's very easy for another commander or for another leader to come in and completely change things. And so if we think there are things that are structurally vital to moving forward in that culture, and especially when it comes to programmatics, policy, money, organizational change, those types of things, those things need to be put in place. They won't change by itself, but it will create the system and it'll create the environment that allows great leaders to push forward. It'll also create an environment that keeps bad leaders from pushing us too far down in a different direction. But I'll pause there for Trish.
Yeah, leadership is always essential here. So again, in the personal perspective of my story, I let leaders know that I was being, subjected to stuff that was harmful. And then I had to go back to the same leaders and say, oh, by the way, here's the, kind of case study in which you can, use my security clearance as a battering ram. So 100% what Ian said is correct. So there is always a continuum of change that's needed. So yes, I think that there is wise policy and congressional action that could support a favorable environment for seeking mental health. But I think that Secretary Austin has done an amazing job leading from the front and speaking about mental health as healthcare. We've seen other amazing leaders around the DoD talk about their own struggles with mental health care. So it destigmatizes seeking mental health care. If anything, I would just like to put a bumper sticker on that, in terms of security risks, the people who don't seek mental health care are probably the folks that pose a bigger risk in terms of their decision-making and wellness. But yes, I think this is a continuum, but leading from the front, as I've seen around the DoD, I think is the essential critical element there.
Awesome. Anyone else with a question? All right.
Hi, can you hear me? I'm Jessica. I'm active duty Army, but I'm currently a DoD Skill Bridge intern with AUSA here in DC. So my question is, you talked about structural changes on a big level, but just from my experience coming out of Fort Riley, watching Big Army try to implement their people first initiatives, as it trickles down to the ranks, it becomes almost forced and inauthentic and just something that the soldiers don't really buy in on because it's an additional stressor to the leadership. How do you suggest, we get around that problem and just have more authentic leadership and authentic, psychological safety within our units?
I'll go first on this one if you don't mind. So practice makes permanent. It doesn't make perfect, right? So the more that if you see something that could be seen as, decreasing a unit's psychological safety, call it out. And also, there were generations ago, there was a difficulty for military leaderships envisioning women, not only in the military, but in senior leadership. And we see that changing. Practice makes permanent. A couple generations ago, there were issues regarding racial integration. And we've seen that get better. It's not perfect, but practice makes permanent.
So I think it's always difficult to take a people issue and put policy in place that fixes that issue. It takes good people to do it. But I can tell you that when you bring in, especially all the services do, and I'm Air Force and not Army, but the problems are the same. But if you take an 18-year-old or a 22-year-old and bring them into service and you don't show them what you expect a leader to look like, that doesn't mean that they're going to be good at it, but it means at least now they have a blueprint. And the ones that are good can immediately start moving towards that blueprint. The ones that aren't still know what success looks like and can keep moving in that direction. And I think that's a better problem to have, that there's going to be a few people who don't follow the blueprint and aren't good leaders and are still working towards that. That is a better problem to have than to not have the blueprint in the first place. But there's no policy and the Air Force has these same policy things where we say you need to focus on your people. And that's a great thing to say. And we should. You shouldn't have to say it. You should just have good people. The problem is we are a microcosm of society, and if you look at our society and all societies around the world, it's not full of good people. It is a mix of people. There are amazing people, there are great people, there are good people, and there are some that you probably don't want to hang out as much. And people can transition between those groups, but we have to have something in place to try to say, this is what my expectation is for you as a leader. And now that I've told you that expectation, let me now walk you through that process and get you to that point. That makes sense in a small organization. The idea of it makes sense in a large organization, but the actual implementation of that is much harder. So, with the 330,000 that we have in the Air Force, and I think you guys are just over 1 million over in the Army right now, active duty, it is difficult to scale any idea, especially when it's people-centric, but we still have to try.
Yeah, and I'll just add one more thought. If 2020 has given us any gift at all, it is a common lexicon about mental health. Now post 2020, we're able to say my anxiety levels are high and have everyone understand that with a common lexicon and experience, because we've all experienced that traumatic event of COVID and what it did to our world, our families, and the people we care about. So we're just opening up a whole new chapter in our ability to normalize talking about mental health and the impacts that certain behaviors can have on the overall well-being and readiness.
All right, we have time for one more question. All right, Nick in the front.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Nick Marak. I'm one of the Protégés, part of HillVets. I have a two-part question, actually. The first one is, how do we ensure that military family members are provided the resources for their spouses who are serving, especially when their spouse has a security clearance and can't talk about their problems at home? So secondary trauma that spouses and children may be experiencing. And then the second part is, for children who are receiving care for mental health reasons and are part of a military family, and as you may know, about a quarter of the troops that are currently serving has had at least one parent serving. How do we ensure that recruiters aren't pulling military records like TRICARE, for instance, and seeing that they have had whatever mental health issues and preventing them from actually serving?
Yeah, I read some of those same stories over the last couple of weeks. I was not aware up until, again, some news came out about it more recently that, children that were in the TRICARE system had a different disadvantage, we'll say, with, recruiters having access to those records. I'm not in the recruiting world. I could see the argument on the recruiting side where they say, well, we can make sure that we keep an issue from happening further on. There are people, and, I talked about this in my discussion, that, there's goodness. There are some good things about having all access to records. From the privacy standpoint, it's horrible. From the readiness standpoint, it could be good. The problem is we have to decide, we as a military and we as a DoD, which is more important, getting the recruits in and getting just numbers of recruits, or getting the right recruits, or do we have the system to take somebody who's close to ready and bring them forward to being completely ready? And without that system, things could be an issue. And so, but as of right now, the way it stands today, there is an unfair advantage of privacy that people have coming from the civilian world. On the other side, making sure, my last unit, I was helping run a wing out in Western California, and we had mental health issues with our children across the base. The biggest problem is we were a remote base. We're in the middle of the Mojave Desert. And so there's not a lot of people who choose to go to the Mojave Desert just for fun. And so trying to find a bench of subject matter experts that can help us through these problems was difficult. So it's like living in a very remote place without the resources that you need. And so we had a huge issue with this. And I don't want to say fortunately, but that is an issue that we have across the U.S. There's just not enough of these professionals for the amount of people who need them. And then I think that we don't have enough. We have experts and we have people who do this. They've got their degrees, they've got their doctorate. But that middle ground, what is the self-aid buddy care of mental health? What is the TCCC of mental health? I really like things like there's the Be There certificate that came out from Lady Gaga's foundation, where they train teenagers and people just to listen. Sometimes that's all people need. And then if you can't help them, now we can move them to another piece of care or another level of care. That way we don't exacerbate the few resources we have at the higher end, and actually we can use them on the people who really need them. And so that was a long way of really not answering your question, but saying that this is a massive problem. And I think with the recruiting side, you're going to have rules come into place that actually fixes that. And until then, it won't change.
Right. So 2 snaps for everything Ian said. If you don't know that I'm already a huge fan of his, please know this now and take a note, because he is just so brilliant and such an asset for the warfighters that we serve. I will say this, that, if we can normalize that people get mental health, then access to health records that reflect that a dependent has had mental health should not be seen as significantly different than, dependents who have received care for joint injuries, broken bones, or asthma. So, this is where I think, again, Ian's model of kind of changing his funding ratio and bringing in, organizational psychologists and other people that could understand mental health in a different way is such a good example for us to look at and follow, right? So recruiters just have a checklist, right? They have a checklist of things that disqualify you from service, and they go through that checklist. If you've said anything, or if they see anything in your records that disqualify you from service, they almost have to move on. Where's the mental health professional in the recruiting station? Where's the mental health professional that they can give a call and say, hey, if someone's on anxiety medication, is it the same thing as having an undiagnosed or untreated, schizophrenic disorder? Are those two things equally disqualifying for military service? Any mental health care 20 years ago was something that we never talked about, we never admitted, and therefore made us disqualified. And the policies that we're operating off of, the checklists that the recruiters have of disqualifying conditions and behaviors, have some dust on them, frankly. So, again, we know better now. So this gives us the opportunity to do better. Recruiters do need to take a look at your medical records. There are a lot of reasons why. I have a dear friend that could never serve because of eczema, which I never thought was a disqualifying medical condition, but it's an immuno compromised condition, and I never knew that until she told me that she couldn't serve. So there are things that will keep you from serving, or at least keep you from initially entering service. So that's one thing. I do want to see ethical regulations and guidelines, and like Ian said, make it so that someone coming from a regular high school and someone coming from a military base have the same opportunity to serve. And maybe bring organizations like the National Security Innovation Network into some of these discussions, so that there are other pathways to service to people who may want to serve, especially in the DoD, but may not be qualified or predisposed to military service. Again, because this is something that matters to me, I think I probably spoke too long on it, but thank you for your question.
All right. On behalf of Cohort 7, we'd like to thank both of you for speaking to us today. We really appreciate your time. And that takes us into a break, and we will be back at 1:30. Thank you.